League of Legends is 99% game knowledge. That sounds like a pretty hyperbolized number, and one that sounds like I just pulled it out of the air, and yes, I don't have any statistical means of proving that it is exactly 99%, but I can assure you that League resembles chess a hell of a lot more than a first-person shooter. Hey guys, welcome to a League of Legends video this time around, and today I want to start a new type of video series on my channel for League in which I help you guys understand how to build a solid understanding of League from fundamental knowledge and concepts of the game rather than personalized situations. League is incredibly complex, more so than you might think. At the very surface, the game has a really low skill floor. Practically anyone can start picking up the game in about less than 20 hours of gameplay. On the flip side, it is safe to say that a skill ceiling for the game doesn't exist due to the nature of it being a competitive game. It's infinite. Earlier, I made the connection between League and chess, and as you already know, chess is one of the most timeless games in the entire world, and one of the earliest examples of an infinite skill ceiling game. Plus, it's not mechanical at all. The only physical effort it takes is picking up a piece and moving it elsewhere. This brings me to the main point of my video. League of Legends is 99% game knowledge and 1% mechanics. These two are proportion often since knowledge entails how much you know about a particular field or subject, and mechanics is how well you can apply that knowledge and or execute on it. Now, where did I come up with the conclusion that game knowledge is basically the be-all end-all of League of Legends and mechanics means very little? Don't get me wrong, some champions require more technique than others to master, such as Zed, Azir, Akali, Lee Sin, and Irelia versus more straightforward champions like Twisted Fate, Garen, and Amumu. So for the former list, mechanics you can argue has a larger contributing factor than just 1%. But for the entire League of Legends game as a whole, I stand firmly on my viewpoint that game knowledge is so much more superior over mechanics that even players with carpal tunnel and rheumatoid arthritis can win most of their League games. Before I elaborate further into what makes game knowledge so much more important than the physical ability to pull it off, let me give you two other examples of the balance between strategy and execution. If we look at the basic conventions of sports like football, tennis, basketball, soccer, golf, and such, there lies a lot of fundamentals needed for the players to understand the most effective and efficient way of scoring an advantage over their opponent if there is one, which differs in every sport. The variance between each sport is massive, as tennis is an incredibly fast-paced sport, while golf can take many hours, barring pace of play policies of course. Despite that, while all great athletes need exceptional knowledge on the sports they play, regardless of which one, they also need the physical abilities to act on said knowledge. After all, even if you know everything about basketball for instance, if you're out of shape with terrible form and bad practice, you ain't gonna be doing jack. The second example is shooting games. While shooters have always rewarded players with a great understanding of the gameplay, the terrain, weaponry, etc., when it comes to first-person shooters, whichever player can act faster and more precisely will win more often than not. Very few instances occur where whoever plans more ahead will come out on top versus the person with a faster reaction time. Although yes, there are cases when a person who plays strategically, such as camping in a spot where they know other players will go through exist, the execution of that strategy matters more. After all, if you can't aim your shots properly while under pressure, you won't be able to achieve much. But let's go back into League. Why do I say League is 99% game knowledge then? The TLDR is that knowledge is power. League is a slow-paced game that has a greater emphasis on strategy and calm, controlled thinking rather than a person's ability to make explosive plays. The more they understand about the game, the greater long-term growth they have. As for the long answer, I have 3 points to support this claim, and I'll go over each of them in reasonable depth. Let's start with the first one, which I call counter-thinking. This isn't a real term, but something I'm sure you guys are familiar with. It's the classic you know that I know that you know that I know that you know that I know that you know that I know, so on and so forth. Predictions, if you will. In chess, victory hinges on whichever player can outthink the other, who can think more steps ahead, who can anticipate each other's moves, and more importantly, who can expect what their opponent expects. League of Legends is riddled with counterthinking because it's a slow-paced battle arena game in which 5 players compete to destroy each other's nexus. In order to do this, each team has to amass enough gold to give them a significant advantage over the other team to push the lead. How do you do this? By thinking further than the enemy team can. When you look at high-level players giving informational videos in the form of VOD reviews and the like, you'll often notice something they say very often. I know that blank is going to blank, or blank expects me to blank, so I will go blank. This is basic counterthinking when you decide your action based on what you predict the enemy will do. In League of Legends, top-level teams are able to develop huge snowballs due to being able to think multiple steps ahead of their opponents and ultimately close out a game by taking every action they know the enemy team will make and acting on that. Some good videos for you to watch regarding this should be popping up right about now as a card, or you can check the description for direct links. While this does sound like basic elementary stuff as counterthinking is applied all the time, the amount of times it goes beyond one step is few and far between. If you're wondering what I mean by one step, here's a hypothetical. Let's say you're a jungler and hanging around topside where your top laner is a champion with a strong early game. Your top laner is pushing the lane in, which usually means they're at risk to be ganked. As a result, the enemy jungler may possibly make their way top. With this prediction, you also make your way top to give your laner backup in case there is a gank. This is one-step counter-thinking in which you predict their first choice of action and act accordingly. Step 2 would probably continue as follows. Since the enemy jungler is going topside to gank your top laner, you decide to match that gank with a counter gank, but the enemy mid laner expects that you'll be there to match a 2v2, and say they're playing a champion that has semi-global or global mobility like Twisted Fate. So the enemy mid laner teleports up there in order to turn the counter gank into a counter gank. This is two-step counter thinking. I'm sure you guys get the idea now. It's basically a form of like rock, paper, scissors. However many steps you can think ahead of the opponent both individually and as a team can ultimately determine a win or loss in the game. The next point is knowing exactly what you can or can't do. Too many times in League, I notice a lot of players, even high elo, say something along the lines of X champion can do this, X champion has a stun, why does X champion do so much damage, or how is X champion doing this? Now maybe it just might be me, but it's very surprising to see Diamond and even some Master tier players not know what champions do. It seems like it would be common knowledge that knowing every champion in the game is an important staple thing you should have in the back of your head, but people don't really exercise that practice that much. And the greatest excuse for that is I never see X champion, or more importantly, I never play X champion, both of which are pretty terrible excuses. Like I said, League of Legends is 99% game knowledge. The more you know about the game, the better your chances of winning are. Knowledge of champions you'll be playing is pivotal, of course, but even more paramount is knowledge of the champions you'll be playing against. Even if you do or don't play that champion, knowing what their abilities do and what function they fit in their team comp and in the game, as well as knowing what they can or can't do, can be just as, if not more important than knowing what your own champion can do. After all, you're just one champion in a pool of 10 every game. While yes, very rarely will you ever run into an AD carry Dr. Mundo, the laning phase doesn't last forever. Sooner or later you will run into him, and not knowing what he does while he knows what you will do will put him at a major advantage. Because while you don't know if you can or can't kill him, he knows if he can or can't kill you. Apart from knowing individual champion strengths and weaknesses, you'll also have to consider the extensive limitations of team compositions. For example, knowing you have a superior teamfight comp or whether splitting them up is a better option. This is commonly referred to as a win condition, the modus operandi of destroying the enemy nexus. Obviously, you need a strategy on how to win, which is the win condition. But without knowing exactly what you and your team can or cannot do, conceptualizing a win condition is difficult. Learning every champion individually is very simple since all you have to know are 1 passive, 3 basic abilities, and 1 ultimate. The only hard part is like understanding the basic interactions or special parts of their abilities, all which can be easily done just by simply looking up the champion on like the wiki or something. The hard part comes in knowing things like champion matchups, team compositions, and the like, which may take years or even be impossible since by laws of permutation there are like over 50 billion possible team compositions you can make. Moving on into the final point I want to make, the small stuff. You might be thinking what I mean by small stuff, so here's a giant wall of text I'll put on the screen right about now. Yeah, it's a lot of them. These are some of what might be a mile-long list of concepts that you should seek to learn in League of Legends. Naturally, there are too many to list, and all of these are what I like to fit into the small stuff. Some of these are larger and more overriding concepts to the game, such as jungle clearing paths, which is one of the most important things to know as a jungler, or vision control, while other things like item stats mean very little. But the reason why I fit all of them under the umbrella term small stuff is that each one compounds a person's game knowledge tremendously, and the more concepts you can understand, the greater chance you have of winning over your opponents. Here's an easy way to think about it. Let's say for each concept you thoroughly understand, you have 1 soldier in your army. Say of the several hundreds or thousands of small things in League you know 20 of them, and your opponent knows only 10. You're putting 20 versus 10. Naturally, you would win in most circumstances. For every concept you understand well, you'll not only expand your options, but it also prepares you for more situations that makes you much more flexible as a player. Even if perhaps you're a support player who will never play jungle, knowing jungle pathing or possible avenues of entry and exit throughout the jungle is just as important for you to know as it is for the jungler. Also, in the event you get autofilled, you at least know that. In a way, the long and short of this point is to try to know everything about the game, even if you will never see yourself play it, because every day you will run into it. Now, of course, it is physically impossible to know everything about League, but you sure as hell can try to learn as much as you can. Information is your greatest weapon. The more you know about the situations you'll be running into, the better you can prepare for them, and the higher your chances are of coming out on top. After all, just imagine how huge of an advantage you would have if you had no fog of war. You would see the entire map and always know where everyone is. You can split push without being scared. You will never get ganked. You can steal barons and dragons. You can counter jungle without problems. There are so many things you can do. That's one single aspect of the entire game. Now imagine if you knew every single one. Having said all that though, I don't want to completely downplay mechanics. Even if you had all the game knowledge in the world, if you don't have the physical practice to pull it off, then it doesn't matter. But I think people overestimate the importance of mechanics. Sure, you see all those montages of players 1v5ing or doing crazy outplays as Zed or Yasuo or whatever, and yes, they're really fun to watch. On the surface it may seem like mechanics, but actually it's not. Knowing when to go in, how to go in, what to do after you go in, whether you can deal enough damage to kill that target or not, what you expect the target will do to retaliate or defend, what uncertainties exist, that's all game knowledge. The only mechanics is you pressing buttons and aiming properly. Even AD carries which need good mechanical play need vastly more game knowledge to factor in things like positioning, how much damage they can deal, how much damage they can take, what attacks should they watch out for, where do they think the enemy will strike, etc, etc. That's all game knowledge. The more you understand not only about the game, but how people think, the better you become in League of Legends. Thank you so much for watching guys. I know it's a pretty long video, but I had a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about. I have even more things to talk about, but I don't want to turn this into like an hour-long video. I do plan to make separate videos to cover more overarching topics, and if you want me to go into more depth on these three, then let me know in the comment section below. If you do have any questions on learning more about the game, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like and share it with your friends if you did find it interesting. And of course, if you want to see more content like this in the future, be sure to subscribe and I'll get more of these videos out. But until then, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys again in the next video. Take care.